Some men leave behind monuments, others leave behind mysteries. George Smith Patton Jr. left behind both, wrapped in a riddle that refuses to solve itself even after 8 decades. Here was an American general who slapped soldiers in hospitals yet saved entire armies from annihilation. A man who spoke of past lives while orchestrating some of the most precise military maneuvers in modern history. A warrior who survived every bullet fired at him across 2 world wars, only to die in a mundane car accident just months after victory. The official story feels incomplete. The timing feels wrong, and those who knew Patton best whispered questions they never answered publicly. Was his death truly an accident? Or did someone decide that this unpredictable general had become too dangerous to live? His story begins long before the tanks and ends with secrets that may never surface. Don't forget to like, leave a comment, and subscribe. You are not here by accident. The Patton family had been sending sons to war since before America was America. George's ancestors fought in the Revolutionary War, and his grandfather died charging up a Virginia hill during the Civil War. By the time George was born in 1865, military service was not just tradition in the Patton household, it was destiny written in blood. Young George struggled with something that would haunt him throughout childhood: severe dyslexia. Words swam on pages like confused enemies retreating from battle. Reading became warfare, and George fought it with the same intensity he would later bring to combat. His father hired tutors, but George found his own methods. He memorized entire passages by listening to others and reciting them as if reading directly from the text. This taught him something lasting. Sometimes victory requires unconventional tactics. At the Virginia Military Institute, George discovered that physical excellence could compensate for academic struggles. Sword work, horseback riding, shooting, these became his languages. While other cadets studied books, George was perfecting saber charges under moonlight. His acceptance to West Point in 1897 marked a turning point, though not a smooth one. His academic performance was weak, but his determination was extraordinary. He repeated his first year not from laziness, but from a refusal to graduate with anything less than perfection in military subjects. This revealed something crucial. Patton would rather fail completely than succeed incompletely. During his time at West Point, he argued that future battles would be won by mobility and aggressive leadership, not by defensive positioning. Most professors dismissed his ideas as romantic nonsense. They taught warfare of the past, while Patton imagined the future. He graduated in 1909 near the bottom of his class, but his bearing impressed everyone. Cadets remembered his intensity during drill, his strict attention to uniform details, and his habit of studying battle maps with the focus of a chess master. The lieutenant who emerged from West Point carried something rare, an unshakable belief that he was destined for greatness. When America entered the Great War in 1917, most generals imagined infantry conflict, men in trenches, artillery barrages, charges across no man's land. Patton saw something else: the future of warfare rolling on steel treads. Tanks were experimental curiosities, often breaking down and moving painfully slow. Most officers dismissed them, but Patton studied British and French reports with the focus of a scholar. He saw past their flaws to their potential. When the chance came to establish America's first tank school, Patton volunteered. In France, he persuaded skeptical instructors to teach him everything they knew. He impressed them with his fluent French, grasp of mechanics, and natural feel for tactics. They watched him climb into tanks and operate them as if he had built them himself, soon nicknaming him Le Général des Tanks. Patton trained crews differently. He drilled not just mechanics, but psychology. "You must be ruthless," he told them. "When you attack, strike so hard that retreat becomes unthinkable." His first combat command came at Saint-Mihiel in September 1918. Patton walked ahead of his tanks, signaling under artillery fire. It was leadership by example that bordered on reckless. In the Meuse-Argonne offensive, his innovations in combined arms warfare produced rapid advances that stunned allies and enemies alike. Near Chepi, German machine gun fire ripped into his leg. Bleeding heavily, he refused evacuation until his tanks secured their objectives, directing men with his walking stick. Hospitalized for weeks, he used the time to draft detailed reports proposing improvements to design, training, and tactics. These papers shaped the foundations of American armored doctrine. By the armistice in November 1918, Patton had become America's foremost expert in tank warfare. Yet peace brought a new struggle: how to preserve and advance this technology in a military eager to forget it. The years between the world wars nearly killed Patton's career more effectively than any German bullet ever could. America's military budget shrank dramatically, tank production stopped, and most commanders returned to preparing for infantry-based conflicts similar to those they had just experienced. Patton found himself assigned to various cavalry units, watching horse-mounted soldiers practice maneuvers that seemed increasingly obsolete with each passing year. But instead of accepting this assignment as professional purgatory, he used it as an opportunity to study mobility, leadership, and tactical innovation from different perspectives. He began corresponding with military theorists across Europe, particularly German officers who were quietly developing new concepts of mechanized warfare despite Treaty of Versailles restrictions. These exchanges were technically legal but politically sensitive. Patton was learning from men who might become enemies in future conflicts, yet he justified these relationships as professional necessities. During this period, Patton's personality began revealing contradictions that would define his entire career. He was simultaneously a student of history and a prophet of military revolution. He could quote Caesar's commentaries from memory while designing training programs for tank crews who didn't yet have tanks to practice with. He studied Napoleon's campaigns obsessively, yet argued that future warfare would render traditional infantry tactics obsolete. His personal life during the interwar years provided stability that his professional life lacked. His marriage to Beatrice Eyre had given him financial security and social connections, but more importantly, it had given him someone who understood his ambitions and supported them unconditionally. Beatrice tolerated his long absences, his obsession with military history, and his habit of practicing sword techniques in their living room at midnight. Patton's writing during this period revealed a mind grappling with profound questions about warfare, leadership, and destiny. He kept detailed journals where he analyzed historical battles, developed theories about future conflicts, and recorded strange dreams about participating in ancient wars. Some entries suggested he believed he had lived previous lives as a warrior, fighting alongside Alexander the Great, serving under Napoleon, charging with Confederate cavalry. These mystical beliefs might have been dismissed as eccentricity if they hadn't been accompanied by such rigorous intellectual analysis. Patton's military papers from the 1920s and 30s demonstrated comprehensive understanding of logistics, engineering, psychology, and strategic planning. He was simultaneously the most rational and most irrational officer in the American military. When promoted to major in 1924, Patton used his new authority to conduct unofficial experiments in mechanized tactics. He organized mock battles between tanks and cavalry, usually rigging the scenarios to demonstrate mechanized superiority. His reports from these exercises predicted with remarkable accuracy how future armored warfare would develop. The economic depression of the 1930s forced further military budget cuts, but Patton adapted by becoming a theorist rather than a practitioner. He wrote extensively about tank employment, combined arms tactics, and rapid maneuver warfare. His articles appeared in military journals, though many readers considered his ideas too aggressive for practical application. By the mid-1930s, European political tensions were rising, and military planners began reconsidering mechanized warfare theories. Patton's earlier writings suddenly seemed prophetic rather than fantastical. When Germany demonstrated blitzkrieg tactics in Poland and France, American generals remembered the officer who had been predicting such developments for 2 decades. When America entered World War II, Patton finally received the opportunity he had been preparing for since 1918. The War Department needed experienced commanders for armored divisions, and Patton's expertise made him an obvious choice, despite his reputation for controversial behavior. His assignment to command the 2nd Armored Division meant returning to tanks after years of cavalry service. But Patton approached this transition like a musician returning to his favorite instrument after being forced to play others. The mechanical details, tactical possibilities, and leadership challenges felt familiar despite technological advances. Training American tank crews for European combat required transforming civilian inductees into mechanized warriors within months rather than years. Patton's methods were harsh by peacetime standards, but effective by wartime necessities. He demanded physical fitness that exceeded infantry requirements, mechanical knowledge that approached engineering competency, and aggressive instincts that bordered on controlled violence. His training philosophy emphasized realistic combat simulation. Rather than practicing parade ground formations, his units conducted continuous maneuvers across difficult terrain under conditions that approximated actual warfare. Live ammunition exercises were common, casualties were accepted as training costs, and soldiers who couldn't adapt were transferred to other units without hesitation. The invasion of North Africa in November 1942 provided Patton's first opportunity to command large armored formations in actual combat. Operation Torch required coordinating complex amphibious landings with rapid inland advances, challenging tasks for any commander, but particularly difficult given the untested nature of American armored doctrine. Patton's initial landing at Casablanca succeeded primarily through audacity rather than tactical sophistication. His forces overcame French resistance through aggressive advancement and overwhelming firepower application. But these early victories masked serious organizational problems that would soon become apparent. The Kasserine Pass battle in February 1943 revealed American inexperience in armored warfare against veteran German forces. American tank crews suffered devastating casualties when they encountered Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps, equipped with superior anti-tank weapons and supported by commanders with years of desert combat experience. Patton's response to this defeat demonstrated both his strategic understanding and his leadership instincts. Rather than accepting defensive positions, he immediately began planning counterattacks designed to restore American morale and demonstrate that German armored superiority was not insurmountable. The Battle of El Gueter in March 1943 marked the turning point of American armored operations in North Africa. Patton's forces successfully repelled German attacks while inflicting significant casualties on veteran enemy units. More importantly, American tank crews gained confidence in their equipment, training, and leadership. Patton's tactical innovations during the North African campaign influenced American armored doctrine for the remainder of the war. His emphasis on rapid movement, concentrated firepower, and aggressive leadership became standard practice for American tank formations. His methods were often controversial, but their effectiveness was undeniable. The successful conclusion of the North African campaign established Patton as one of America's most capable field commanders. His reputation for tactical brilliance was balanced by growing concerns about his volatile temperament and controversial public statements. Military leaders recognized his value while simultaneously worrying about his reliability. The invasion of Sicily in July 1943 represented Patton's first opportunity to command an entire army in major combat operations. The 7th Army, under his leadership, was assigned to support British forces under General Bernard Montgomery, an arrangement that immediately created tension between two commanders with vastly different approaches to warfare. Montgomery favored methodical advances with overwhelming supply support and minimal casualties. Patton preferred rapid movement, acceptable risk levels, and objectives achieved through speed rather than firepower concentration. These philosophical differences became tactical conflicts that complicated Allied coordination throughout the campaign. Patton's forces achieved remarkable success during the early phases of the Sicilian invasion. His armored spearheads advanced faster than intelligence estimates had predicted, capturing key positions before German defenders could establish effective resistance. The speed of these operations surprised both allies and enemies. However, success bred overconfidence, and overconfidence led to the incidents that nearly destroyed Patton's career. On August 3, 1943, while visiting evacuation hospitals, Patton encountered soldiers suffering from what would now be recognized as combat stress reaction, but was then often dismissed as cowardice. The first incident occurred at the 15th Evacuation Hospital, where Patton confronted a soldier who showed no visible wounds. When the man explained he was hospitalized for his nerves, Patton became furious. "Your nerves, hell, you are just a goddamned coward," he reportedly said before striking the soldier with his gloves and ordering him returned to duty immediately. The second incident, occurring at the 93rd Evacuation Hospital on August 10th, was even more serious. Patton encountered another soldier hospitalized for combat fatigue, and his reaction was more violent. He not only struck the soldier, but drew his pistol and threatened to shoot him as an example to other cowards. Medical personnel were horrified by these incidents, but military protocol prevented immediate public disclosure. Hospital commanders reported the events through military channels, where they eventually reached General Dwight Eisenhower, Patton's superior and longtime friend. Eisenhower faced a difficult decision. Patton was arguably America's most effective field commander, leading successful operations that were shortening the war and saving Allied lives. Yet his behavior was completely unacceptable by any standard of military leadership or human decency. The compromise solution required Patton to apologize publicly to the soldiers he had struck, address his entire command about proper treatment of combat stress casualties, and accept temporary limitations on his public role. This punishment was severe enough to demonstrate official disapproval while preserving Patton's availability for future operations. News of the incidents eventually reached American media, creating a scandal that threatened to end Patton's career permanently. Public opinion was divided between those who saw his actions as inexcusable abuse and those who viewed them as necessary discipline during wartime. The controversy revealed deep cultural divisions about military leadership, mental health, and acceptable behavior under extreme stress. Patton's own response to the controversy demonstrated both his character flaws and his strategic intelligence. While he grudgingly offered the required apologies, he privately maintained that his actions had been justified by military necessity. He viewed combat stress as a contagious weakness that undermined unit effectiveness and believed harsh treatment was appropriate prevention. The long-term consequences of these incidents extended far beyond immediate punishment. Patton's reputation for unpredictable behavior made him a liability for sensitive operations requiring diplomatic coordination. His future assignments would be limited to roles where his tactical brilliance could be utilized, while minimizing opportunities for controversial conduct. By early 1944, military necessity overcame political concerns about Patton's behavior. The planned invasion of Europe required experienced commanders capable of leading large armored formations in rapid exploitation operations. Despite his controversial reputation, Patton remained America's most qualified armor commander. However, his initial role in Operation Overlord was as much deception as command. The fictitious 1st United States Army Group, supposedly stationed in southeastern England under Patton's leadership, was created to convince German intelligence that the main Allied invasion would target the Pas-de-Calais region rather than Normandy. This deception operation required Patton to maintain a high public profile in England, while actual invasion preparations occurred elsewhere. He participated in carefully choreographed public appearances, issued radio communications that German interceptors were expected to monitor, and commanded a phantom army of inflatable tanks and wooden aircraft. The success of this deception contributed significantly to the surprise achieved during the Normandy landings. German reserves remained positioned to defend against Patton's fictional invasion, while actual Allied forces established beachheads in Normandy with less resistance than anticipated. When Patton finally arrived in Normandy to assume command of the Third Army in August 1944, American forces had been fighting through hedgerow country for weeks with limited territorial gains. The terrain favored defensive operations, and German resistance had been more effective than pre-invasion planning had anticipated. Patton's approach to the Normandy breakthrough differed dramatically from the methodical tactics employed by other Allied commanders. Rather than attempting to overwhelm German defenses through firepower concentration, he planned to exploit any breakthrough with rapid armored advances that would prevent enemy forces from establishing new defensive lines. The Third Army's breakout from the Normandy beachhead began on August 1, 1944, with Operation Cobra creating the gap that Patton's forces needed. His armored spearheads poured through this opening with a speed that surprised both Allied and German commanders. Within days, his forces had advanced farther than many military planners had expected. They would move in weeks. Patton's tactical philosophy during the breakout emphasized maintaining momentum regardless of supply difficulties or flank security concerns. He believed that rapid advance would create more advantages than it cost, forcing enemies to react to American initiatives rather than implementing their own defensive plans. The Third Army's advance across France demonstrated the effectiveness of Patton's theories about mechanized warfare. His forces covered hundreds of miles in weeks, liberating French cities and capturing German formations that couldn't retreat fast enough to avoid encirclement. The speed of these operations exceeded even Patton's optimistic predictions. However, success created new problems. The Third Army advanced so rapidly that supply lines couldn't keep pace, and fuel shortages began limiting operations. Patton's requests for supply priority were denied in favor of other Allied operations, creating frustration that would influence his behavior during subsequent campaigns. The liberation of Paris on August 25, 1944, marked the culmination of Patton's French campaign. While other Allied forces officially entered the city, Patton's operations had made this victory possible by preventing German forces from organizing effective resistance or destroying vital infrastructure. By September 1944, the Third Army had advanced to the German border. Having covered more ground and captured more prisoners than any other Allied formation. Patton's aggressive leadership had transformed American armored doctrine and demonstrated the potential of mechanized warfare when properly employed. December 1944 brought the most severe test of Allied resolve since the Normandy invasion. German forces launched a massive counteroffensive through the Ardennes forest, achieving complete tactical surprise and threatening to split Allied armies while recapturing vital Belgian ports. The Battle of the Bulge caught Allied commanders unprepared, despite intelligence warnings that had been misinterpreted or dismissed. German armored spearheads penetrated deep into Allied-held territory, surrounding American forces in Bastogne and creating a crisis that threatened the entire European campaign. Patton's response to this crisis demonstrated both his tactical brilliance and his understanding of military psychology. While other commanders focused on defensive measures to contain the German breakthrough, Patton immediately began planning counterattacks designed to exploit German overextension. The speed with which Patton redirected his forces surprised even his own staff officers. The Third Army was advancing eastward toward Germany when the German offensive began. But within hours of receiving new orders, Patton had his formations turning northward to strike the German flank. This maneuver required extraordinary organizational skill and logistical coordination. Entire armored divisions had to reverse direction, change supply routes, and assume new objectives while maintaining combat effectiveness. Most commanders would have required weeks to accomplish such a redeployment, but Patton's forces completed it within days. The relief of Bastogne on December 26, 1944, marked the turning point of the German offensive. Patton's forces broke through enemy encirclement with characteristic aggression, delivering supplies and reinforcements to the besieged garrison while simultaneously attacking German rear areas. Patton's tactical approach during the Bulge differed from conventional responses to enemy breakthroughs. Rather than attempting to restore original defensive lines, he used German overextension as an opportunity to destroy enemy forces that had advanced beyond their supply capabilities and defensive support. The success of Third Army operations during the Bulge enhanced Patton's reputation among both Allied commanders and enemy forces. German intelligence reports from this period described him as their most dangerous opponent, capable of rapid decision-making and tactical innovation that consistently surprised their own commanders. However, success also created new tensions within the Allied command structure. Patton's aggressive tactics and rapid advances often complicated coordination with other Allied forces, leading to conflicts with commanders who preferred more methodical approaches to military operations. The conclusion of the Bulge campaign in January 1945 left Patton's forces positioned for the final assault into Germany. His tactical innovations during this battle had prevented German forces from achieving their strategic objectives while demonstrating American capabilities for rapid maneuver warfare under extreme conditions. The final months of World War II in Europe provided Patton with opportunities to demonstrate his theories about armored warfare while simultaneously revealing the personal characteristics that would make his post-war career problematic. The Third Army's advance into Germany began in February 1945 with operations designed to breach the Siegfried Line, Germany's defensive fortifications along their western border. These fixed defenses had been constructed to channel attacking forces into predetermined killing zones, but Patton's tactics emphasized avoiding such confrontations through rapid flanking movements. His forces achieved breakthrough speeds that exceeded all previous advances, covering ground so rapidly that German defensive preparations became obsolete before they could be implemented. Entire German formations surrendered when they found themselves surrounded by American armored spearheads that had appeared behind their positions overnight. The crossing of the Rhine River in March 1945 demonstrated Patton's flair for dramatic gestures combined with tactical competence. While other Allied commanders prepared elaborate river-crossing operations, Patton's forces achieved their crossing through surprise and speed, establishing bridgeheads before German forces could organize effective resistance. Patton's personal crossing of the Rhine became legendary when he deliberately stumbled upon reaching the eastern bank, then filled his pockets with German soil while declaring his intention to conquer the entire country. This theatrical gesture was calculated to boost American morale while demonstrating contempt for German defensive capabilities. The liberation of concentration camps in April 1945 profoundly affected Patton, though his response revealed both his humanity and his limitations. He was genuinely horrified by the conditions he encountered, immediately ordering medical care for survivors and compelling local German civilians to witness what had been done in their vicinity. However, his understanding of the broader implications of these discoveries was complicated by his existing prejudices and limited political sophistication. While he recognized the moral enormity of what had occurred, he struggled to comprehend how such systematic brutality related to broader questions about German society and post-war reconstruction. Patton's advance toward Czechoslovakia in May 1945 created diplomatic tensions that foreshadowed post-war conflicts. His forces could have reached Prague before Soviet troops, but political considerations required him to halt his advance to avoid complications with America's wartime ally. This restriction frustrated Patton enormously, and his public comments about Soviet intentions began creating problems with Allied political leadership. He believed that American forces should continue advancing eastward to establish the strongest possible position for post-war negotiations with the Soviet Union. The German surrender on May 8, 1945, ended Patton's combat career at its peak. His forces had advanced farther, captured more territory, and achieved greater success than most military planners had believed possible when the European campaign began. Yet victory also eliminated Patton's primary purpose and revealed aspects of his character that were better suited to wartime than peacetime leadership. His comments about German reconstruction, Soviet intentions, and American post-war policy demonstrated political views that conflicted with official government positions. The transition from war to peace proved more difficult for Patton than any battlefield challenge he had ever faced. Victory in Europe left him commanding occupying forces in Bavaria, responsible for civil administration rather than military operations. This role required diplomatic skills and political sensitivity that Patton had never developed and showed little inclination to acquire. His public statements during the occupation period created mounting controversy. Patton openly criticized denazification policies, argued for rebuilding German military capabilities to counter Soviet expansion, and made remarks about German civilians that contradicted official American policy regarding post-war reconciliation. These comments reflected Patton's genuine beliefs about international relations and military strategy, but they also demonstrated his complete lack of political judgment. He seemed incapable of understanding that public expressions of such views undermined official American policy and created diplomatic complications with Allied governments. By December 1945, military and political leaders had concluded that Patton's usefulness as an occupation commander was exceeded by the problems his statements were creating. Plans were being developed to transfer him to other assignments where his tactical skills could be utilized, while limiting his opportunities for controversial public comments. On December 9, 1945, Patton departed his headquarters for a hunting expedition in the German countryside, accompanied by his chief of staff and driver. This recreational trip was routine, similar to many others Patton had taken during his months in Germany, and involved no unusual security precautions or travel arrangements. The accident occurred near Mannheim when their vehicle collided with an American military truck. The impact was not severe enough to seriously injure the other occupants, but Patton suffered a spinal injury that left him paralyzed from the neck down. He remained conscious and able to speak, but medical examination revealed damage that was likely to be permanent. Patton was transported to a military hospital in Heidelberg, where he received the best medical care available in 1945 Germany. His condition initially appeared stable, and doctors were cautiously optimistic about his survival prospects, though they held little hope for recovery of motor function. During his hospitalization, Patton remained mentally alert and continued discussing military matters with visitors. He expressed concern about American policy toward the Soviet Union and frustration about his inability to continue serving in an active military capacity. His personality remained unchanged despite his physical limitations. On December 21, 1945, 12 days after the accident, Patton died unexpectedly from what medical records described as pulmonary embolism and congestive heart failure. His death shocked family members and military associates who had expected him to survive despite his paralysis. The circumstances surrounding Patton's death immediately generated questions and speculation. A general who had survived countless combat situations, including direct enemy fire and previous injuries, had died from complications following a relatively minor traffic accident in occupied territory under American control. Official investigations found no evidence of foul play, but the timing and circumstances created suspicions that persist decades later. Some observers noted that Patton's death conveniently resolved political problems his controversial statements had created, while others pointed to the routine nature of his final trip as evidence against conspiracy theories. The funeral arrangements reflected both Patton's military achievements and the controversial nature of his final months. He was buried with full military honors, but the ceremony was smaller and less elaborate than might have been expected for such a prominent commander. The official explanation of Patton's death as an accidental tragedy has never satisfied everyone who knew him or studied his career. The circumstances were unusual enough to generate speculation that has persisted for decades, fed by Patton's own controversial statements and the political tensions of the immediate post-war period. The most persistent conspiracy theories focus on the possibility that Patton was assassinated because his public criticism of American post-war policy had become too problematic for political leaders to ignore. Proponents of these theories point to his vocal opposition to denazification, his advocacy for rebuilding German military forces, and his warnings about Soviet expansionist intentions. Some researchers have noted discrepancies in witness accounts of the accident, questioning whether the collision was as minor as initially reported and whether Patton's injuries were consistent with the described impact. They argue that more thorough investigation might have revealed evidence of deliberate action disguised as accidental occurrence. Douglas Bazata, a former Office of Strategic Services operative, claimed in 1979 that he had been ordered to assassinate Patton and had carried out this assignment. However, Bazata's account contained numerous factual errors and inconsistencies that undermined its credibility, and no corroborating evidence has ever been discovered to support his claims. Robert Wilcox, author of Target Patton, compiled circumstantial evidence suggesting that Soviet intelligence agents might have orchestrated Patton's death to eliminate a prominent critic of Soviet policy. This theory relies heavily on speculation about Soviet capabilities and motivations, without direct evidence of their involvement in the events leading to Patton's death. Medical experts have questioned whether Patton's injuries were severe enough to cause his death, noting that similar spinal injuries in other cases did not necessarily result in fatal complications. However, medical understanding of spinal trauma was limited in 1945, and factors such as age, general health, and psychological stress could have contributed to his deterioration. The timing of Patton's death has struck many observers as remarkably convenient for those who found his public statements problematic. His transfer to a position with less public visibility was being planned when the accident occurred, suggesting that other solutions to his controversial behavior were being considered. Intelligence documents declassified decades after the war revealed that Patton was indeed under surveillance by American intelligence services during his final months, partly because of concerns about his public statements and partly because of routine security procedures for high-ranking officers in occupied territory. Some historians have suggested that the most significant conspiracy regarding Patton's death was the decision to treat it as an accident without conducting the thorough investigation that the death of such a prominent figure should have warranted. They argue that political considerations influenced the official response to his death. The lack of definitive evidence supporting conspiracy theories has not prevented their continued circulation, particularly among those who view Patton as a martyred truth-teller who was eliminated because his warnings about Soviet intentions proved too prescient for comfort. These theories often reflect broader suspicions about government secrecy and official explanations of controversial events. Alternative explanations focus on Patton's psychological state during his final months, suggesting that the transition from active command to occupation duties had created depression and stress that might have affected his judgment and physical health. This interpretation views his death as genuinely accidental, but influenced by his deteriorating mental condition. The influence of George S. Patton on modern military doctrine extends far beyond his immediate tactical innovations during World War II. His theories about armored warfare, aggressive leadership, and rapid maneuver became foundational elements of American military strategy throughout the Cold War and into contemporary conflicts. Patton's emphasis on mobility over firepower concentration influenced the development of American armored doctrine during the 1950s and 60s. Military planners studying his campaigns concluded that speed and tactical flexibility provided greater advantages than methodical advances with overwhelming supply support, a lesson that shaped NATO strategy for potential conflicts with Soviet forces. The concept of deep battle operations, involving rapid penetration of enemy defensive lines, followed by exploitation of breakthrough opportunities, became standard practice in American military planning, largely because Patton had demonstrated its effectiveness during his European campaigns. His tactics provided practical examples of how theoretical concepts could be implemented successfully. Military education institutions incorporated Patton's campaigns into their curricula as examples of effective armored warfare. The Command and General Staff College, the Army War College, and similar institutions used his operations to illustrate principles of combined arms coordination, logistics management, and aggressive leadership under difficult conditions. However, Patton's influence on popular culture has been equally significant and possibly more enduring than his impact on military doctrine. The 1970 film Patton, starring George C. Scott, created a public image of the general that combined his actual achievements with dramatic interpretations that emphasized his most colorful characteristics. This cinematic portrayal influenced public perceptions of military leadership, creating expectations that effective commanders should be charismatic, aggressive, and slightly larger than life. The film's success contributed to the mythology surrounding Patton, while simultaneously distorting understanding of his actual personality and methods. Books about Patton have ranged from serious military histories to sensationalized popular biographies, each contributing to the complex legacy surrounding his career. Some authors have emphasized his tactical brilliance and strategic vision, while others have focused on his controversial behavior and personal eccentricities. The contrast between Patton's public image and his private personality has fascinated historians and psychologists, attempting to understand how such contradictory characteristics could coexist in a single individual. His combination of tactical rationality and mystical beliefs, professional competence, and personal volatility remains difficult to explain satisfactorily. Modern military leaders studying Patton's career face the challenge of separating his effective methods from his problematic behaviors. His tactical innovations remain valuable, but his leadership style would be completely unacceptable in contemporary military organizations, with their emphasis on professional behavior and respect for subordinates. International military establishments have also studied Patton's campaigns, though their interpretations often reflect their own cultural values and strategic requirements. German military historians, for example, have generally praised his tactical competence while criticizing his understanding of broader strategic implications. The debate over Patton's ultimate historical significance continues among military historians. Some view him as a tactical genius whose methods revolutionized modern warfare, while others argue that his achievements were primarily due to superior American resources rather than exceptional personal abilities. Contemporary special operations forces have found particular value in studying Patton's emphasis on psychological warfare and the importance of maintaining offensive momentum. His understanding of how fear and uncertainty affected enemy decision-making has influenced modern approaches to irregular warfare and counterinsurgency operations. Behind the public persona of the aggressive tank commander existed a complex individual whose private interests and personal beliefs were often at odds with his military image. Patton was an accomplished poet, a student of classical literature, and a man obsessed with historical continuity in ways that bordered on mystical. His poetry, much of which remained unpublished during his lifetime, revealed sensitivity and introspection that contrasted sharply with his battlefield demeanor. He wrote verses about warfare, death, and destiny with genuine literary skill, demonstrating an artistic temperament that few of his contemporaries suspected existed. Patton's library contained extensive collections of military history, classical literature, and philosophical works. He could quote Homer in Greek, recite Kipling from memory, and discuss Napoleonic campaigns with scholarly precision. This intellectual foundation informed his military thinking in ways that purely technical training could never have achieved. His fascination with reincarnation and past lives represented perhaps the most unusual aspect of his personality. Patton genuinely believed he had fought in previous historical conflicts, claiming memories of serving as a Roman legionnaire, a Viking warrior, and a Napoleonic cavalry officer. These beliefs were not casual fantasies, but deeply held convictions that influenced his approach to military leadership. During visits to historical battlefields, Patton often displayed uncanny knowledge of terrain features and tactical considerations that surprised local historians and military guides. He would describe ancient battle formations and strategic decisions with such accuracy that observers wondered whether he had somehow accessed information unavailable through conventional historical sources. His religious beliefs combined traditional Christianity with mystical elements that reflected his reincarnation theories. Patton attended church services regularly and considered himself a devout Christian. Yet he also believed in spiritual continuity across multiple lifetimes and saw warfare as a cosmic struggle between eternal forces of good and evil. The relationship between Patton and his soldiers was far more complex than his public image suggested. While he demanded absolute discipline and could be harshly critical of perceived cowardice, He also demonstrated genuine concern for his men's welfare and took personal responsibility for their combat effectiveness and survival rates. His attention to detail regarding soldier comfort and equipment quality was legendary among those who served under his command. Patton insisted on proper medical care, adequate food supplies, and functional equipment with an intensity that matched his demands for tactical excellence. He understood that effective fighting required both psychological motivation and physical capability. Letters between Patton and his family revealed a tender, affectionate man who missed domestic life intensely while maintaining absolute commitment to his military duties. His correspondence with his wife, Beatrice, demonstrated deep emotional attachment and intellectual partnership that sustained him through the isolation of high command. His relationship with his children was complicated by his frequent absences and demanding personality, yet his letters show genuine interest in their development and education. He encouraged them to pursue excellence while warning against the personal costs of such dedication. Patton's financial management reflected the same attention to detail he brought to military planning. Despite his family's wealth, he maintained careful records of expenses and investments, demonstrating practical skills that complemented his tactical abilities. This financial security allowed him to focus entirely on professional development without concerns about economic survival. His collection of military memorabilia included weapons, uniforms, and documents from conflicts spanning several centuries. These artifacts were not mere curiosities, but study materials that he used to understand how warfare had evolved and might continue developing. Each item represented lessons about combat effectiveness under different technological and social conditions. The physical courage that made Patton famous was accompanied by intellectual honesty that compelled him to acknowledge his own limitations and mistakes. His private journals contained frank assessments of his tactical errors, personality flaws, and professional shortcomings that demonstrated remarkable self-awareness for someone with such a public ego. His staff officers often noted the contrast between Patton's public bombast and his private thoughtfulness. In planning sessions, he listened carefully to subordinates' suggestions, incorporated their expertise into his decisions, and gave credit for successful innovations that originated with other officers. The legacy of George S. Patton encompasses both his undeniable military achievements and his equally undeniable personal flaws. He was simultaneously a tactical genius and a diplomatic disaster, a caring commander and a harsh disciplinarian, a student of history and a believer in mystical nonsense. Understanding Patton requires accepting these contradictions rather than resolving them. His effectiveness as a military leader was inseparable from the personality characteristics that made him problematic as a human being. The same aggressive instincts that drove his tactical innovations also created the conflicts that limited his broader influence. Modern military institutions continue studying Patton's methods while explicitly rejecting his behavioral examples. His tactical innovations remain valuable, but his leadership style serves primarily as a cautionary example of how personal flaws can limit professional effectiveness even at the highest levels of achievement. The question of what Patton might have accomplished if he had possessed better self-control and political judgment remains fascinating but unanswerable. His actual achievements were extraordinary, but his potential achievements might have been even greater if he had been able to moderate his most destructive characteristics. Perhaps the most accurate assessment of Patton is that he was exactly the right person for the specific challenges of World War II armored warfare, but completely wrong for almost every other military or civilian role he might have filled. His strengths and weaknesses were perfectly matched to the requirements of his historical moment. The enduring fascination with Patton reflects broader questions about leadership, achievement, and the relationship between personal character and professional success. His career demonstrates that exceptional ability can coexist with serious character flaws, creating both inspiration and cautionary lessons for future generations. In the end, George S. Patton remains what he always was: a complex, contradictory figure whose legacy continues generating debate decades after his death. He was undeniably one of America's greatest military tacticians, yet his personal limitations prevented him from becoming one of America's greatest military leaders. The mystery of his death adds a final layer of ambiguity to a career already filled with contradictions. Whether he died accidentally or was murdered, whether his controversial statements made him too dangerous to live, whether his mystical beliefs influenced his final days, these questions may never be answered definitively. What remains certain is that Patton's impact on military history and popular culture far exceeded what most people achieved during much longer lives. In 60 years, he transformed American armored warfare, contributed to Allied victory in World War II, and created a legend that continues inspiring and troubling people who study his extraordinary career. The tanks have long since been replaced by newer models, the battlefields have become peaceful countryside, and the soldiers who served under Patton have mostly passed away. Yet questions about his character, his methods, and his death continue generating passionate discussion among historians, military professionals, and anyone fascinated by the complexities of human achievement under extreme circumstances. George S. Patton conquered death not through immortality, but through the enduring power of unresolved mystery combined with undeniable accomplishment. His story remains compelling because it refuses to provide easy answers about heroism, leadership, or the price of greatness in a world that demands both exceptional achievement and acceptable behavior from its most prominent figures.